welcome to the Healthy Debate. My name is Lindy Naughton. Our aim with this programme, produced by Health Freedom Ireland in conjunction with the Irish Inquiry, is to promote debate on issues relating to health in Ireland. Much of the material you see on this programme is not available on the mainstream media or on channels, so if you wish to support us and to spread the word, please press share on your screens now. This has been a dreadful day. Personally, I feel like a prisoner who went up in front of the parole board and rather than being given remission has been told that their sentence has been increased. Who would have thought a year ago that when we first heard the words Covid-19 virus, that it would still top the health agenda? Although the rate of so-called cases is falling, especially today, as they always do after a winter spike, plus we have the compelling evidence that lockdowns do nothing to reduce the incidence of a virus. Yet, despite these two facts, cases going down, lockdowns definitely don't work. We just know this. But our great leaders have decided to leave us under house arrest until March the 5th, as I'm sure you all know. So that's another 5 weeks of schools closed, hospitals offering only a limited service, restaurants and bars struggling, sport is just gone, and only food shops and a certain amount of, say, pharmacies, other essential services open. Already hundreds of businesses have shut down and will probably never open again. And the economy is tanking. This is not good news. As for the people's health, what can we say? We human beings thrive on contact with our families, our friends, and our community. More than anything else, we need chat, we need love, we need hugs, and we need lots of cuddles, and we are not getting them. Meanwhile, in the real world, Sweden, which followed the initial recommendations of the World Health Organization not to lock down, now has about 40% community immunity. In other words, they've finished, it's over there. In the United States, states like California and New York that locked down hard early on are now opening. They're following the examples of states like Florida that didn't do hard lockdowns. Russia, surprisingly, has opened up. And we all know about the marches and protests going on in the Netherlands, in Austria, in France, in Germany, and all over the world. People are revolting in a good way. Let's move on to vaccines. The government says it wants 100% vaccination of the population by the end of the year. So, what about those of us that may well be immune already or that had COVID? What about those allergic to the chemicals they used in vaccines? What about children? Is it safe for them? Like the swine flu vaccine, if you remember, that has ruined 90 children's lives in this country alone. What about the elderly, many of whom are proving too weak to respond positively to this so-called vaccine? And there's the big question. Why are the elderly not allowed to die in dignity anymore? Why are they forced to take a vaccine that will ensure they test positive, because everyone who takes the vaccine tests positive, and then possibly die of it, with the family permitted to say their goodbyes only when they're dressed head to foot in protective clothing? Yes, I'm pretty angry. I think we all should be very angry about what's going on. This is about politics, not health. And the root cause of the problem is that we have a cobbled together coalition government of inexperienced politicians and an opposition happy simply to play games. As far as I've lost my page. Sorry, excuse me. As far as we know, the only politician on this island calling out the governments of both Britain and Ireland on their lockdown policies is the DUP's Sammy Wilson. If there are more, we would love to hear from you. We have been trying to get politicians to come on this channel with no success. Please start speaking out. We need an opposition. Joining us today are two Charlies, if I may call them that, one on Skype and one here in the studio. Anyone who watched the marathon at the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles will remember the epic battle for the silver medal between our guest Charlie Spedding from County Durham and our own John Tracy from County Waterford. In the end, John took silver and Charlie, a mere 7 seconds behind, took bronze. Earlier that year, Charlie had won the London Marathon. I think he'll agree that was a very good year for him. He later became a pharmacist with a big interest in nutrition, and just over a year ago published a book called Stop Feeding Us Lies, which is well worth reading, and you can get it on his website. In the studio here we have Charles Dunne from Dublin, who owns a business called Gymtrition, if I'm spelling that right, and is also an advocate for healthy eating. So we'll get down to that in a little while. So we'll go to Charlie Spedding first. Charlie, are you there?
I am. Pleased to be here too.
Good, that's good to hear. Charlie, tell us a bit. I've just outlined your career as an athlete, and I was saying to the others a bit earlier that we all liked you because, you know, we just liked you. You were okay. You were from the north of England, and when you got to the Olympics the second time, I don't know if there was any Irish there, but I remember this when you said it to me earlier. We were all cheering you on. We thought, well, this is Charlie's year, maybe. But it didn't quite work out, did it, in Seoul?
Well, I finished sixth, which I was very happy with in Seoul. Yeah. But it's interesting you say that. Because I had a bit of an epic duel with John Tracy in the Los Angeles Marathon, and John Tracy was a huge sports star in Ireland because he'd won 2 World Cross Country Championships, and I think he was the only Irish medal in the Los Angeles Games, and I had this big battle with him. But I had the good manners not to beat him, so people in Ireland, for years afterwards, I think I had more recognition in Ireland than I did in my home country because I'd had this big battle. People liked me because I hadn't beaten John Tracy, but John Tracy was such a star, they thought, wow, that Charlie Spedding must be a good runner if he can run John so close. Whereas back in England, we had several people with Olympic gold medals from that games, like Daley Thompson and Seb Coe. So I was just another one of those guys who got a bronze medal.
Well, we have a little film for those who may not remember those glory days when marathon running was really just becoming, well, the really popular sport of the people. So we have a little clip from I think it's from the London. What? Yeah, the 84 London Marathon.
Looking tired, that final climb is hurting his legs. He's outside the course record, but this, not just a personal best, but a very, very fine run indeed. It wins the London Marathon for Charlie Spedding and takes him to the Olympic Games in Los Angeles.
There you are. I remember those that red gear. Come to think of it, isn't it funny?
Yes, good days. Long gone now, but they were great days.
Yeah. So was that your finest achievement, do you reckon? London?
No, the Olympic medal in Los Angeles was my finest achievement. I had to win London to get to the Olympic Games, but I'd never even competed on the world stage. I'd been in the European Championships and the Commonwealth Games, but it was the first world level competition I'd been in. And for me, I'd been a good runner for a long time, but it was only right at the end of my career I became a really good runner and competed at that level. So I don't think anyone expected me to get a medal in those games. So the medal, even though there were 2 people in front of me, that was my greatest achievement.
We won't. I mean, I could descend into sheer nerdism here and talk about Carlos Lopez, but I won't do that. Who was the winner of the race, by the way, for anyone? I think he was 40 at the time, wasn't he? He was phenomenal.
Carlos Lopez.
Yeah, Lopez.
Is the winner.
Yeah. So anyway, the running career I don't know. Could you tell us what happened afterwards and how you became a pharmacist?
Well, I was a pharmacist straight from from school, I went to university to study pharmacy, and I qualified, and I was trying to be an athlete and a pharmacist at the same time, and I was doing all right, but I got into my later 20s and realized and felt that I could do more with my running career, but it wasn't happening because I was really falling between two stools. So I decided I made the bold decision to leave pharmacy for a while and really concentrate on my running career, and it paid off hugely. I improved enormously, and it culminated in that Olympic medal we've just been talking about. And then I continued again, and I had a few injury problems over the next few years, but I made it to the Seoul Olympics in '88, and I was actually delighted to finish 6th in that because I'd had some problems beforehand. And then after that, I realized that I was getting too old to do the thing that I really loved doing. And it's a difficult thing for all athletes to accept that you're in your 30s, but you're too old to do what you're good at. And so I went back to pharmacy. Took me a few years to get fully back up to speed, but I was then a pharmacist right through until my very late 50s, 59 actually, when I left pharmacy because I was very frustrated and disillusioned because I was seeing an awful lot of people in the pharmacy who had metabolic illnesses, and they were diligently taking their medication, but they were never getting better because the drugs were treating the symptoms of their disease, but not the root cause. And so for several years, I researched that, and my bias was they weren't doing enough exercise. Obviously, I would think that because of my background, but I discovered through the research I did that it is really down to the most important part. Exercise is important, but diet is by far the most important thing, and most people, an awful lot of people in the Western world, and especially in the UK, have a pretty terrible diet. And if they could improve that, they wouldn't need anywhere near as much medication. And so that all the research I did and culminated in me writing the book you mentioned earlier called Stop Feeding Us Lies. And I call it that because there's so much misinformation and myth about what makes a healthy diet.
Right. So when you were a pharmacist, did you notice anything about the way the pharmaceutical companies changed their tactics in dealing with illness?
Oh well, there are so many problems in the way that pharmaceutical companies will promote some of their drugs. I can say these things now. I'm no longer a pharmacist. I would get in trouble if I said them while I was still registered. But things like statin drugs, which an awful lot of people take to lower their cholesterol levels. Well, from all the research I've read since leaving pharmacy, I'm quite convinced that cholesterol is not a cause of heart disease. Cholesterol is a vital molecule in our bodies that does a great deal of good and healing. And lowering it, artificially lowering your natural level of cholesterol, causes lots and lots of problems. But the drug companies ran trials and used relative risk instead of absolute risk to tell you how wonderful the drug was. They would say that it produces a 50% reduction in risk, when in fact if you looked at the actual results, for every 100 people in a trial, 99 people taking the drug didn't have a heart attack, but 98 people out of every 100 taking the placebo didn't have a heart attack. So the difference between 98 and 99 to you and me is 1%. But the drug companies would say, well, the difference between one person and two people is 50%. So they'll call it a 50% improvement when it's nothing of the sort. And that type of thing goes on an awful lot to promote drugs that aren't as successful and efficacious as the pharmaceutical companies want you to believe.
Well, I'm going to go slightly off piste here because the way you're explaining it is very interesting. And with what I noticed when I looked at the studies of the vaccine, the first one, the Pfizer one, was that the number of people who, they divided 40,000 people into two groups. And when I looked, I can't remember the exact numbers offhand, but the number of people on the placebo who got it was pretty small. It was maybe 120 out of 20,000. And I'm thinking, how can this be actual proper science? I mean, virtually nobody, I don't know how these tests are set up anyway. You know, a laboratory is not the same as a kitchen or as normal life. But I think that we, you know, I'm curious to know how they decide that, say, a vaccine is effective when, to my mind, not that many people were getting sick, either on the placebo end or on the real end, or whatever it was.
Well, I think since COVID first arrived, they've been determined to produce a vaccine for it. And I think I am not anti-vaccines. Some vaccines have saved millions of people's lives. It's my medical background. I think a lot of vaccines are wonderful, but you can't vaccinate against everything. And they've been determined to vaccinate everybody for this COVID since it first started. And I think scandalously, health authorities have completely ignored other options that we could have used to reduce the danger of this COVID virus and reduce the death rate as well. And the things that we could have done also help metabolic diseases, which was the biggest health problem we were facing before the coronavirus came along. All the metabolic diseases associated with obesity and type 2 diabetes and heart disease, they're all helped by the correct diet. And this is really important because 95% of the people who have died with COVID have had pre-existing health conditions, and most of those pre-existing conditions have been metabolic conditions. So if we'd sorted out a proper diet and we had reduced all those metabolic diseases, we wouldn't have had anywhere near the problems we've had with COVID. And they could have solved two problems in one go, but they've completely ignored it, which I find absolutely scandalous. One of the main problem with our diets is the low-fat, high-carbohydrate, which ends up being high-sugar diets. And fat doesn't cause heart disease, but sugar is implicated in too much sugar is implicated in a huge array of metabolic diseases. And interestingly, there have been some studies done on hospitalized COVID patients, and they found that by measuring the blood glucose level when someone was hospitalized with COVID, if it was above normal, they could predict that those people were going to have the biggest problems. And the people with the highest blood sugar, when entering hospital, were the most likely to die compared to the people who had normal blood sugar. So it has a direct effect. Other studies have also shown, this is 9 or 10 years ago, they showed that high levels of blood sugar affect the immune system because there are cells in the immune system that recognize molecular patterns in pathogens, and those don't work as well. They can't recognize the bad guys in your bloodstream if there's too much sugar in your bloodstream, because it affects the way they work. Then if you can't recognize the virus, you can't fight it off. So there's a huge kind of worms here that the authorities, because the authorities have just ignored all of this, and they could have put things in place to vastly improve everybody's health. And I've become so cynical with all the research I've done. The reason they don't do it is because there's no profit in doing that. Getting people to eat a healthy diet of real food, not processed food, the big companies can't make any money out of that. The local farmer and the local fisherman will earn an honest living, and they don't want that. They want you to eat their processed food upon which they make tons and tons of money. Right.
I think I want to get back to you on what's going on in England anyway, since our government seems to think it's a good idea to copy Boris's emissions on everything. He was on the 6 o'clock. He was on the television again every evening. He's there. So we will get back to that in a minute. I want to bring Charles Dunne in on the same discussion that we've just been having. Charles, could you just introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, my name is Charles Dunne, Lindy. I run and own Gymtrition. It's 100% whole food, healthy eatery cafe / weekly meal plan delivery service. I'm based in Dublin and I've been operating for the last 5 to 6 years now, I think it is. Once again, what Charlie said there, I'd be a really big advocate of healthy eating, the benefits of healthy eating. And as Charlie was explaining there, he was saying about he was a professional athlete, so he would know the importance of training. But my slogan is actually 20% gym, 80% nutrition, because it really is the dominant thing. Well, in regards to what you're trying to do, if you're trying to bodybuild or kind of, your physique will match what you eat, and once you're eating the correct things, the correct macronutrients, you can shape your body in a healthy way with real foods, and if you're an athlete as well, then to fuel your body as well. I work with a lot of professional athletes, a lot of boxers, and I'll have them on specific diets that we'll work from. Say they've been on a 12-week plan. We'll start from week 1 to week 12, and we'll slowly change it as we need to go, for optimal nutrition.
So, I mean, why did you come across?
Right, well, I'm a chef since I'm a kid.
Yeah, right.
So I was chefing on and off since I'm 16. Basically, I went to Crumlin College, for catering originally, and I was in the out of the industry, and I'd be a big kind of fitness fanatic as well. I'd be training kind of once, twice a day, a lot of days, weight training, kind of football, boxing, sports, anything that we kind of would be physical. And I was training for a long time, and I'd be a big enough fella, but I could never get myself into kind of the shape I wanted. I thought I deserved, because I would always increase my training to try and get my physique to improve. So it was going on for a year, and I was kind of in decent shape, but I wanted to get the stomach sorted out and all that kind of thing. So I had been trying for years, and I tried the boiled rice, boiled chicken stuff for a while, and I'd last a week, and I couldn't do it, and in fairness, it wouldn't work anyway. So I started to research and do my own bit of stuff online, and research, the dirty word now, I suppose, isn't it? But I started to look at alternative ways of eating, and as Charlie was saying there, I went totally low carb. Now, not like strictly where you can't eat anything, but really low carb, really kind of medium protein and high healthy fats. And I would kind of take a picture every couple of days. We were doing a thing in the gym, and the transformation was astonishing. Like, it was literally within 6 weeks, and I've been trying for 3 or 4 years to kind of get myself into a situation where I thought, as I said, I kind of deserved the physique that I was putting the work in for. But when I concentrated on food, it just came like that, really good. And as well as that, kind of mentally, there's almost a carb fog that you kind of come out of, because you're eating 3 and 4 carbs a day, especially refined carbohydrates. After you've had something to eat, you're kind of sitting on the couch for a half an hour, kind of getting yourself back together. But when you're on a kind of a high fat diet or kind of a medium protein diet, you cut all that out. So rather than your body going up and down, the insulin level raising and lowering, you're kind of steady all the time. And I just found my head just kind of cleared, and then that kind of gave me the impetus then to go and open the business and finally say, right, I'll make a move on this. So it was a kind of how I am where I am. It's kind of marriage of convenience to chefing, an interest in physical activity, and that's how it came together.
Right. So I'm going to ask both of you this. What about the new fad for veganism?
Oh, well, you can ask Charlie, see what he thinks.
Right.
Well, I have 2 chapters in my book about it. One's about all the nutritional deficiencies that you get if you don't eat any animal foods at all, and the other's the stuff about cows and sheep being bad for the environment. They've been around for 50 million years, so I don't think there's much sway in that. But there are important nutrients that we only get from animal foods. Vitamin B12 is one of the best known. It's vital for our nervous system, and also for the formation of blood cells. So if you've got a circulatory system and a nervous system, which is all living animals, you need some vitamin B12. Herbivores, like cows and sheep, have bacteria in their rumen. They have a completely different digestive system to us. Those bacteria produce vitamin B12 that's then absorbed, so that they get their vitamin B12 from bacteria acting upon plants. We don't have that. We have to consume vitamin B12, and it only exists in animal foods, or you can take supplements. But that's just one of the things that people miss out on. And I think I'm very much in favour of freedom of choice, but I find that very staunch vegans are like a religious cult. They believe it's good because they believe it's good, and they don't really have any evidence, but they call you a animal murderer if you suggest that eating animal fats and proteins is good for you. But it's the way we evolved. We evolved into the creatures we are because our ancestors a long time ago chased after large animals and caught them and ate them, and that's how we developed such large brains. All the running we did to catch those big animals in Africa meant that we lost our body hair and developed fantastic array of sweat glands. We are the best animal on the planet at running long distances in hot weather, and so there must have been a lot of evolutionary pressure on us to do that. And there are groups in Africa who still do this persistence hunting, where they'll chase an animal. It sprints away from them because we can't sprint very fast, but it gets hot and we chase after it again, and it sprints away and it gets hotter, and you keep chasing it until it just collapses from heat stroke, and there you are, you've caught a big animal without having claws or horns or any of those things, just through persistence and the ability to cope with heat. So that's how we evolved. So it's a bit ridiculous to suggest that we should eat a diet that's suitable for a herbivore when we are omnivores, but we function absolutely fine as carnivores. There are plenty of people who are strict carnivores and they're in excellent health. But vegans will tell you that they feel good when they switch to veganism, because if they do that, they start being very careful about what they eat, and they eat lots of fresh vegetables, and they stop eating sugary things and all the junk stuff they had, and they probably do start to feel well. But after about 5 or 6 years, some American studies showed that 5 out of every 6 vegans go back to eating animal-sourced foods because they don't feel good, and they feel much better as soon as they go back to it. But it's a fad, and again, we're back to the same thing. Big food corporations can make far more profit out of what they call plant-based food than they can from selling animal products, because animals are more intensive to raise. So it comes back, an awful lot of it is money. Yes, it is, and it's especially dangerous for children as well. Children should not be brought up on a vegan diet. I have kept a file on my computer of court cases where parents have been found guilty of either grievous bodily harm or actually the manslaughter of their own children through feeding them a strict vegan diet, and that is horrific to hear, but it does happen. So it's very important to have full nutrition, and to do that you need some animal sourced food. It could be eggs, it can be fish. It doesn't have to be red meat, but red meat is one of the best sources.
Yeah, I completely concur with that. You need evolution is there. You know, we've evolved throughout this, the eons, millennia, eating these kind of foods, and for someone to come in now in the last 20 or 30 years and just say that you've got to cut a whole lot of, a whole macronutrient out of your diet, and I think what I would have a problem with is if you can eat vegan and you can have a healthy balanced diet and you can get your branched chain amino acids and your B12s and all that kind of stuff in, fine, if that's a choice, that's a choice. But I find a lot of people are vegans because they disagree with the killing of an animal, which is fine if that's the stance they take. But what I see a lot of is a lot of vegans don't really like even vegetables and stuff. So they're living on high processed sugary foods, refined carbohydrates, flour. It's all chips and rice and pasta, and really, really bad stuff. And so I would actually see, you know, again, you look at vegans, do they look healthy? You know, and you can really tell in the person's face. And I'm not slightly vegan. Again, as I say, if you can get a balanced diet from vegetables and that kind of stuff, fine. But I would have a big concern over refined carbohydrates.
Well, I happen to be a vegetarian my whole life, but not a vegan. Right. But we've had a question in, which is an interesting one, which is about how to follow a gluten-free diet if you're on. What do we call this kind of diet? Just an omnivore diet. Is there any there's no problems with gluten?
I get a lot of people asking me, can you do dairy-free and gluten-free? But I wouldn't have any gluten in my food anyway. I only use like kind of slow-release carbohydrates, and I make everything from scratch in the shop. So like there's no breadcrumbs or flour or sauce, like ready-made sauces, that kind of stuff. I think cutting gluten out of your diet is a really good thing. Now again, not totally completely cutting it out, but it has an awful effect on, I think, a lot of kind of chronic illnesses. You know.
Have you any research done on that, Charlie?
About gluten-free?
Yeah.
Well, gluten is a protein found in grains like wheat and barley, and some people react very badly to it and just are in considerable discomfort if they eat it. So they just have to avoid bread and other grains like that. A friend of mine is like that. Sadly, he also has to avoid beer, which he's very upset about. But everybody has bread with everything, but it's by no means the most nutritious food you can eat. So finding a way to just avoid it, rather than eat gluten-free bread rolls, which apparently taste absolutely awful, I think the wisest thing to do is just avoid foods that have it in, which are grains, and you can get plenty of other types of food, even for vegetarians. There's plenty of other choice, but you have to be more imaginative.
I think, Charlie, just come in there, I think there's a big difference in the wheat that we get now that we would have had like 60, 70 years ago. I think they use the wheat now, yeah. Well, the way they make the bread now, they can have it made within a couple of hours. So they industrialised, I think, in the 60s or 70s, so it's a completely different product to what we would have had like 50, 60
Even
years
brown
ago.
bread, our brown bread.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think there's a thing called elk wheat now, and it's only like, you know, you see the adverts, and it's the wheat is so high and stuff.
Yeah.
But the elk wheat, I think you can either process it 3 or 4 times a year now. You get 3 or 4 yields a year, where you used to just once a year, I think. So it's a totally different product in any way than what was there like a long time ago, you know.
Well, interestingly enough, I was reading about the Irish famine, and they said that one of the problems was that the wheat that was grown in this part of the world wasn't good enough because it was too wet, and that they found it hard to mill, which I didn't knew. You know, I know there was spelt in the past, but there is also these strange concoctions for keto diets, that it's some strange kind of flour thing they make, almond flour.
Oh, they use ground nuts and stuff and all that. It's just something different. I'd use that myself now. I was doing little bits and pieces. Would you? But it's just whole nuts are a great source of healthy fats for you. Okay. And really good source of protein as well. So yeah.
Right. So what about the big thing everyone is talking about at the moment to do with COVID, which is vitamin B12? What am I talking about? Vitamin D and zinc. So Charlie, what you were going to talk about that, weren't you, as well?
Well, it's been known for quite a few years that optimum levels or good levels of vitamin D greatly diminish the severity of viral respiratory infections, which usually meant the cold or flu, and that's been well known. And in some parts of the world, during the first peak of COVID infections back in March and April last year, some doctors, knowing that, tested people coming into their hospitals who were coming in with COVID and tested their levels of vitamin D, and found that the ones with the lowest levels of vitamin D were far more likely to die from COVID than the ones with the best levels. But all these months later, there is still no official advice from, I can't speak for Ireland, but certainly in the UK with the SAGE committee that advises the government, they have never come out and advised people to take it, even though there is absolutely no downside to topping up your levels of vitamin D and potentially huge benefits. You have to take an awful lot of vitamin D for it to become toxic, and no one would take that much. But especially in the winter, a great many people have vitamin D deficiencies, and it makes them much more susceptible to disease. People used to, when I was at school, we were taught that you needed vitamin D for strong teeth and bones, which is true. But as the years go by, they discover more and more processes in the body that vitamin D is involved in, and it's involved in the vast majority of processes that go on in the body. And it's extremely important, and I cannot understand why it isn't promoted as a sensible thing to do for everybody, especially at our sort of latitude where there's just not enough sunshine during the winter months to create any vitamin D in our skin, and no downside and potentially great benefits. I find it scandalous that it isn't promoted.
And what about the zinc end of things? Do you know anything about it?
I think I'm not too much up on the zinc. I think it's when it's combined with vitamin D that I think it has the better benefits then again. And what Charlie was saying there, I think, is right. Any study I've seen, apparently Northern Italy is a really, really bad black spot for vitamin D. And when you say this to people, they think, sure, Italy, the Mediterranean diet, and I think Northern Italy and Southern Italy are a really different place. And I was looking at a guy talking about saying that it's so many nanograms, and they were like 13 nanograms per person, and that was a big. Now I know it's obviously multifactorial, the deaths, but when you compare that with Japan, who had no lockdown and maybe had prior immunity from the 4 stars, but their elderly are so focused on getting out and doing the Tai Chi and kind of everything is about trying to live forever, and that their vitamin D was really through the roof. I think it was up at 40, 50, 60, which is unheard of kind of as a population in general. And I think the stats are, I think it's for every 50 people that died in Europe, like Asia had like 1 death in the original peak of it. So I think obviously it's multifactorial, but I think vitamin D, and as Charlie says, why not give people? Why not tell people to take it? There's no downside. As you said, you'd have to take an awful lot to beat any kind of toxicity in it. So. Can
you get vitamin D from any natural sources? Because as you've said,
I think it's. I'm not really much.
Food.
I'm more of a layman than a science man, but I think Charlie will tell you it's more of a hormone than anything else. I think you can get it from food, but I think sunlight is the main thing.
Would that be true, Charlie?
Sunlight on the skin is the best way to reach it, but you can get it in food, and I'm sorry to say to all vegetarians, the best sources are eggs. And meat and liver, and because the type of vitamin D that you get in animal sources like that, like eggs, is called D3.
Yeah.
You can get some vitamin D2 from certain plants like mushrooms, and then it has to be converted into the active form, which is D3. So the best source after sunlight is in animal sourced foods, and it's also fat soluble. You need some fat in your diet to absorb it, but you can take supplements. I take the vitamin D supplement every day during the winter months just to make sure, and I would advise that for everybody.
And how much, because I do the same, and from trying to train in the dark in the winter, you need it.
They're not hugely expensive. They're not dirt cheap, but they're not hugely expensive. It's absolutely a good investment in your health to buy them and take them each day.
And what's the recommended dose, do you think? Because I've noticed from the jars I've got from various people, there's UI or something, then there's grams. It's all a bit confusing. I'd really like to know what is the right.
It is. I usually work on UI, which is international units. And some of the health authorities recommend 400 a day. But then when you read into that, 400 a day is the minimum you need to take to avoid developing rickets, and that's a serious deficiency disease. So that's not optimum health, the avoidance of a serious disease. I take 1,000 units a day. I was watching a video this afternoon where they were talking about taking 4,000 to 5,000 units a day being absolutely normal thing to do. Some of the recommendations you get from health authorities really are at the absolute lowest end of the scale to avoid you getting a serious deficiency. And for optimum health, you need to take more than that.
So
you need to have a good supply.
But what does the 1,000 mean? Because on the particular bottle that I'm taking at the moment, I think it says 10. That funny U, the Greek U thing, and I. And I'm wondering, am I taking enough? I take 2 of them now.
I'm sorry, Linda, I had a lot of crackle on my line and I didn't hear what you said.
What I'm saying is, you're saying 1,000 international units. That's right. Sorry, excuse me. But I've noticed that on the when you get it in a bottle or a little jar, the way they describe what's in the actual pill it differs a lot. And I think on mine it just says 5 UI, I think.
25 micrograms of vitamin D is equivalent to 1,000 international units.
Right, okay. I wish they'd clarify that. Yeah.
I think that's right.
Yeah, it's not easy sometimes being healthy. There's another, as somebody who I think does eat healthily myself, my other query would be to both of you about oils, because I mean I still, and also because I know from ultra runners that the women in particular seem to need more carbohydrates, whereas I think you can get more of your calories from oils. Would I be right, Charles?
Well, for me now, I'd steer clear of any kind of seed oil at all.
Right.
Do you mean like omega-3s and that kind of stuff? Do you mean
no, I just mean,
oils?
well, I wouldn't go near corn oil or anything like that, obviously.
No, nothing like that for me now. For me,
say olive oil.
For me, it's coconut oil, extra virgin, one cold pressed virgin, olive oil and coconut oil, and a real butter. That's it. And kind of if I was doing kind of homemade food, it'd be kind of like beef dripping and stuff, the old-fashioned stuff. Like, yeah, 1,000,000%.
Right.
I wouldn't go near any kind of seed oils at all. They're really, really
like
bad. Like
rapeseed.
Really, really bad for you. Anything like that. All that's been pushed is kind of polyunsaturated.
The Irish rapeseed industry is going to be very annoyed with you.
Look, all I can say is what I've read into myself, and for me it's just olive oil and coconut oil would be really mine now. Right. Charlie may differ now, but for me it's stay as well. It's a refined food. You know, it's a processed food. They're heating, they're cooling down. The molecular structure of the oils is kind of comes apart a bit and then it goes back together, and it's not something you want to really do. You know?
What do you agree there, Charlie, on oils?
Yes. Those seed oils like rapeseed and sunflower oil, all these things that are pressed out of seeds have too high a level of omega-6 fatty acids in them, and they tend to increase inflammation in your body, and omega-3s tend to reduce inflammation. And our hereditary diet, our ancestral diet, would have had a balance of about 1 to 1. It would have been equal. But in a lot of Western diets that use these seed oils, the ratio can get out to 10 to 1, 16 to 1, so you get lots and lots of inflammation in your body. And that's the worst thing you want for your health. It's really bad news. And much more natural oils like olive oil, coconut oil, and I don't know how much of whether vegetarians eat real butter or not, but butter is an excellent fat to use, because oils are just types of fats. I'd recommend butter and even lard for cooking in. That might be going too far for some people.
Yeah, a bit like some of those horrible things that people...
Coconut oil is a really good one because it can reach a really, really high temperature before it becomes unstable. Really, really high, yeah, really good. So like, I wouldn't be recommending kind of shallow frying that to an extent, but it's really, really good. It's really, really good for you.
A young lad, on the butter thing, a young lad who I used to coach many years ago, who used to say to me that he would never eat anything that was invented in a laboratory.
Yeah. Well,
And so that he ate the butter and the potatoes and so on.
I think me and Charlie are kind of singing off the same hymn sheet.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have different views on a lot of stuff, but again, I would always say to people, stay as close to source.
Yeah.
You know, real food, as close to source as you can, and you can't really go too far wrong with that, you know.
Well, I think my own argument with a lot of vegan stuff is that it seems to involve an awful lot of air miles.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's it.
You know. But there's something else I want to ask you, Charlie, because as you know, one of our prominent marathon runners, Jerry Kiernan, died last week, and also Pat Hooper, another prominent marathon runner, died just about 10 weeks ago. So we've had 2 deaths of marathon runners in their late 60s, and you probably know what I'm going to ask you now. I used to coach what I called them the ultra loonies, people who ran enormous amount of miles, and I read all the various books, the Noakes book and so on, because I was worried about their health. Yeah. And I'll ask you about the boxing too. But I'm just wondering, how critical is a proper diet? It sounds stupid even when I'm asking you, to be honest. How critical is a good diet for somebody doing long distance running for their future health, you know, once they've stopped?
Well, I think it's vitally important. It's vitally important for everybody. But people, marathon runners doing huge mileage, put their bodies under a great deal of strain, and it's very and an awful lot of runners from my era and Jerry Kiernan, you're just talking about, were brought up on the idea that you had to eat huge amounts of carbohydrates to have the energy to run a marathon. And when you get into that habit as a runner, you tend to keep eating the same thing when you stop running, and then you have the danger of putting on too much weight. Or I know runners who were very good runners and did an awful lot of miles, and they in later life developed type 2 diabetes, which comes from eating too much sugar, and all carbohydrates digest down into types of sugars. So yes, my answer really is that everybody needs to eat a healthy diet throughout life. Doesn't mean you can't ever have a treat. It doesn't mean that at all. But your diet has to be healthy all the time. And I think Charles was absolutely right, saying the easiest way to do that is to stick to real foods that our great grandparents would have recognized as food. Stuff that comes from a farmer or a fisherman and not from a factory. I don't think, as sad as it is, I don't think we can read anything into the fact that 2 marathon runners have died in their late 60s as being an indictment for marathon running. There are, each individual has an individual story. And my answer would be everyone should eat the best diet they can.
Oh yeah, it's just I happen to have heard of a few things, like a long distance swimmer too, with what you were describing as metabolic illnesses, which it's just something. It's a thought. With the kind of sports you're involved in, Charles, it's more building up muscle, isn't it? In our case, it was just losing weight.
Well, it's more food for kind of food for fuel.
Yeah.
I call
it.
Well,
that's
I think what you alluded to there, I think, is it's not so much a sport. It's more of how you've actually fueled yourself, you know, for your career, and then going on again. Then I think is this Sir Steve Redcliffe? Was he the rower?
Yes.
I think his trick used to have parcels of sugar in the string vest. And I think when he was on the podium when he got the goal, I think he was type 2 diabetic.
Really?
And like to look at a guy like that, you think he's in the prime of his life. He's at the winning. So they're fueling themselves with like ultra processed carbohydrates, like sugars, like to get that quick hit of energy. And I think in the long term there's been an awful lot of studies in a lot of programs. I've seen a guy go across the Atlantic with his wife in a canoe, and they were like, a canoe, I mean a big proper thing, but they had went across, and they started off on 65% of their diet was fat, and they had put it up to 85% near the end of it, and they'd beaten any record by 20 or 30 days. And really I think that the future for it, I think, is to really have a look at fueling your body through healthy fats.
Yes.
Again, as I said, because as Charlie was alluding to, if you if you eat in a certain way and you're a really high performance athlete, like the likes of who was the swimmer, the Australian guy, used to eat 12 pancakes for lunch and 12 pancakes for breakfast and stuff.
Can you remember?
Was it Thorpe, I think? I'm not too sure, but they're training 8 hours a day, you know, and they're fueling themselves to the hilt for that quick hit of, it's not as much endurance, it's more kind of like steady, you know, straight bursts and sprints. But if you stop that kind of training and you keep eating that way, then it's going to really take effect, and it's probably taking an effect anyway. But for me personally, I'd be a lot more boxers would come into me really, and again, it's food for fuel really. You know, that kind of way. Like this is like, you only see 12 rounds in a ring, but the work that them lads have to put in to get themselves. They nearly have to do 1,000 rounds for a 12-round fight, and all the running and all the other stuff they do as well. So I would have them on I'd start them off at maybe 1 or 2 carbs a day of slow release carbohydrates, say oats, brown rice or a sweet potato, something really, really simple, and some protein, some veg. And again, we get to the last week, they'll be on 0 carbs basically, and I'll have up the fats really, really high, and the performance the lads put in, and they think like they might be beating the odd time on ability, but or maybe nervous energy, but they'll never be beating on fitness or endurance. Yeah,
that reminds me of it, Charlie. Do you remember the what was it? The carb depletion diet or the something or other? Do you remember?
Yes.
What was it?
You were supposed to
it's just
no carbohydrates for 2 or 3 days, maybe 5 or 6 days before your marathon. So you were completely depleted, and then eat loads and loads of carbohydrates for the 3 days leading up to the marathon, thinking that you would get a sort of an overcompensation and store even more carbohydrate than you normally would. That was the plan. But I never did that to that extent. I did because I didn't know any better at the time. I did eat more carbohydrates over the last few days, but I didn't like the idea of doing something so drastic to my body in the final week before I ran a marathon. So I didn't go the whole hog on. That's the wrong expression to use. I didn't go full out on the carb depletion and then eating lots of it afterwards. I felt like keeping my body on an even keel was more important.
I think so. I think we could talk about this for hours, and there's many other topics I hope to discuss that we've just not had time. So I'd like to thank the two Charles and Charlie, the two Charlies, for a very interesting discussion, and I'm sure we'll have more questions coming in. We had plenty coming in there, and so once again, thank you very much. And with a bit of luck, people will realise that if they do improve their diets, their health generally will improve as well.
Yeah, most
it's all good. Don't forget that the Healthy Debate is brought to you by a small group of volunteers, and thank you to our producers. Sarah's here today as well, Stephen, Danny, and our 2 Ballyfermot students, Akira and Connor, who are keeping us all in order. If you want to support what we're doing financially, we're not going to say no, so you can look at the Irish Inquiry site for donations. I'd like also to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has contributed, not just Charles and Charlie today, but we've become aware of people who hold slightly, who are going against the consensus on this whole coronavirus thing and are being treated with vile abuse online and in the medical profession, in their personal lives. They're being treated very, very badly. And we would just like to thank those people for standing up for the rights of all of us to live our lives as we wish. And we just hope that we all emerge from this fairly soon. So thank you again to everyone. Thank you for looking, and we'll see you next week. Good night.
Thanks so much.